Alright, here they come. Well, I've been fighting for about 4 hours now, a little bit over 4 hours. Held our own so far. But it's gonna take every bit of effort from my left wing here to hold. It's a lot of Union troops. I don't know if, historically, I don't think Hooker and Mansfield launched such a powerful attack around this time period. That is something I've noticed about this scenario, is it seems, and it is a historical variant, so it's important to remember it's not supposed to be exactly the way things occurred in real life, which is nice, because, I mean, you have the option of playing scenarios that let you recreate it exactly as it occurred, but it's nice to not have to essentially script everything. I mean, I know a fair bit of what's going to happen because I know the general layout of the battle. Great, they're retreating. But I don't know the exact times of all the attacks because it is a variant, and some of the attacks are a little bit different. You'll see that later. Most of the weight of this attack is coming kind of on my right. I don't think this is Sumner's attack. His came more around 10:30, 11 o'clock, as I'm just talking about how the timing isn't exact, but I don't believe it's Sumner's attack because there's no one attacking further off to the right. Although it could be. One of the beauties of Fog of War, you don't know exactly who's attacking where. One thing the game could improve upon would be kind of neat, and they have it to a certain extent, but if you had more specific information on the units based on their flags. Many of the states will have state flags with them. Doesn't seem like they all do, though, or at least they don't stand out. The Union flag stands out much more than the actual state flags. As you can see, that regiment off retreating there on the Union end has a state flag. But most of the Union flags are what stand out, not the state flags. And I think if they kind of made it a more, I don't know, bigger kind of look, might interfere with the user interface. But if they, for example, had maybe two flags a little bit further apart, some of those states you do see having flags that are, you know, two flags, but if they're a little bit further apart so you could see both of them, that might be kind of cool. Might not be entirely accurate, but speaking of entirely accurate, I'm going to get some cavalry involved in here. I don't believe anything like this occurred, but I positioned them a little bit to my right so they could prevent any flanking movements around these woods, and that's exactly what they're going to do. Going to send them in on one of those rare cavalry charges. You didn't see that a whole lot in the war, but I figured if the Union is just going to keep shooting like that and have their flank exposed, that would be one of those rare times that cavalry would work in an attack. So that's kind of neat. Well, what's going to happen? Wow. Melee's lasting longer than I thought it would. Perfect. Wonder why they don't surrender if my guys always surrender when they attack. Anyway. Keep on pursuing them, boys. It's not quite like Total War where you rack up tons of casualties pursuing them and they don't fight back at all. It doesn't seem anyway. Well, that charge didn't work. But that was a fresh infantry unit attacking head-on versus flank. That's probably more realistic with what would have happened. These other cavalry units are dismounted, so we'll move them over to give some support. The nice thing about cavalry in the game is they fire carbines, which is accurate. So they reload a lot faster, especially some of the Union units that are using Sharps breech-loading weapons. Instead of loading the rounds in the front like a muzzle loader, you actually get loading it in at the breech, kind of like a bolt-action, kind of like a preliminary to a bolt-action rifle, except that you cock the breech. There's a lot of shotguns out there nowadays that are still like that. One of the downsides is it seems they traditionally only carry what's that? It seems that they only carry the same amount of ammo as a regular infantryman, 40 to 60 rounds, and cavalry can burn through their ammo way faster with breech loading weapons. One other thing I notice about cavalry in the game is that it also seems like they take a disproportionately large amount of casualties when they're engaged in a stand-up fight against infantry. I don't know if that accurately reflects the real world, but it is definitely something I've noticed. Union's kind of bent back my flank here on the right. Those regiments that were part of that center are all gone. Battery of artillery starting fire in there, but we've got a gap in there. Gonna try and put some more infantry in there. We're holding up fairly well. I've had to deploy most of my reserves. Oh, that's what the note was. Okay, this is Sumner's attack then. I was mistaken there. You can see some regiments off there on the right. Kind of moving around here, but for a split second you saw regiments on the right moving toward my center, which was Sumner's other division. In the Battle of Antietam, Sumner personally accompanied General Sedgwick through the woods and led an attack with his division in what was very controversial, these woods up here. The Confederates were in those woods at the time, and they launched a flank attack on Sumner's division, inflicting heavy casualties. But Sumner accompanied Sedgwick's division. The other two divisions of his corps were supposed to support the attack, but they actually got lost in the woods and ended up coming out toward the Union center, which they are marching that way now. But I gotta make sure my left will hold. With all these Union troops attacking, it certainly seems like my line is holding up a little bit better than it did in the past. They're marching right around that flank. They could come in and crush me if they kind of reposition to the right, but that would open their flank up to my units in the center. So anyway, they're forming up here. They're kind of exposing their flank, though. I've got some regiments along these woods. If they're going to form up like that, I might have an opportunity to hit them in the flank. We'll see. Approaching on 5 hours of continuous combat here. You can see the bodies litter the ground on the left. On the right, they're just starting to fight, so really no casualties here. This is the first time the battle is extending anywhere outside of the west, or the west woods. Well, kind of the left flank of the Confederate Army. The Union's just going to form up here, and they're going to launch an attack right into my center, but I've got brigades astride their flank. This is not a very tactically sound move. One downside a little bit of the AR scripting, we're going to send these men forward. I might have been able to wait for the Union to get in position, but I'd rather hit them in the flank now. Drive them back now. Not quite as dramatic a flank attack as I had hoped, but either way, they've still got some very large regiments exposing their flank to me. So let's move forward and let's attack. I said I was going to be less aggressive than Lee was historically, but this was a pretty good opportunity. This is French's division, by the way, of Sumner's corps that attacks the Union first, with the famous Iron Brigade alongside it. Casualties are mounting. But as I said, I was going to try and be a little bit less aggressive than Lee historically, but this is a pretty good opportunity, hopefully to even the odds in the center by smashing the Union on the flank. Oh, great. Melees. Gosh, my regiment is like 100 and some odd men to their, looks like 600. Wow, they're retreating. One thing I'm not sure about this game, I've never really been able to tell, is if charging into the flank matters, because by the time you get to a certain range away from the regiment, they auto-charge into you. And I haven't been able to tell. I would think it would, but I haven't been able to really tell if charging into a flank gives you better results than charging head-on. I would imagine if you're charging from distance it does, because at the very least you're not taking fire while you're closing the distance, but if actually having a solid line crush into an enemy flank and kind of envelop it, if that has a huge impact on it, I'm not quite sure, honestly. Got one regiment out here kind of trying a double envelopment with a battery of artillery firing into these Union regiments' flank as well. So they're being flanked on two sides. And actually that lead regiment was being hit from almost the rear as well. So this is not a good start for French, the Union division commander, as he's already got several regiments running and panicking. This is a very good start here to this flank attack as we accelerate a little bit here. We see me rolling up the Union line quite easily, quite effectively. This initial Union attack by French really didn't do much, and I quickly routed him. His attack was over in less than a half hour from when it began, at just about the 5-hour mark of this battle. Check on the casualties here. Definitely mounting at a fairly alarming rate. But hopefully this gives me an edge. Union maybe won't press my center so much. That was the main Union attack on the center, which did actually eventually, the weight of numbers eventually allowed them to break through the Confederate center and force the Confederates back. So, hopefully now we're going to have a huge edge. Look at all those Union boys running. All those Yankees. Who am I kidding? I'm a Yankee. I'm from Wisconsin. One more regiment to send off. He does have a brigade or so forming up along that fence line. Not quite the panic-stricken mob that I was hoping. Very large regiments on his side, though. French's division had, you know, it was a very large division at this this juncture, the Battle of Antietam. It was huge. I mean, obviously you could see it coming forward. Get a kind of a ground level view here of the fighting going on. French had over 5,000 men. So yeah, that's a very large Union division. Confederate divisions tended to be, well, at least at this time in this battle, the Confederate divisions are far smaller. Hill's division, which occupied this section of the line, only had about 2,500. French's division had over 5,000, obviously substantially more. That being said, Union corps were far smaller than their Confederate counterparts, as the Confederate Army really wasn't a corps-based army until after Jackson's death, after Chancellorsville. It was a divisional-based army up until the reorganization after the Peninsula Campaign, and then from mid-1862 through mid-1863, it was really just two wings of the army. And I don't think Lee probably would have ever changed that without Jackson dying. With two very, very qualified and competent commanders in charge, he could effectively split his army into two wings. Whereas when Jackson died, he split it into three wings. I think that doesn't say much about the remaining commanders so much as he didn't want to give any one commander command over such a large force. I don't know if he didn't trust them or he just knew they weren't as effective a commander at the time in 1863 when that happened. Hill was suffering from poor health. Ewell hadn't really proven himself in a large-scale command here. French is reorganizing. I'm still launching my troops forward in attack. This is something I didn't really intend to do. I didn't intend to continue pressing after the initial attack, but my men are still engaged and pulling them back from my running. And as you see, there's another regiment being thrown back. Union force was not exactly practical, kind of like Lee's decision not to retreat after the first day of Gettysburg, although it was probably a blunder in my point as I get myself engaged in a battle where maybe I could have bought myself more time. Really, this battle is all about, on the Confederate side, is buying yourself time. Keep your army in good condition as long as you can. Survive as long as you can, which I definitely didn't do a very good job of doing. It's another brigade mounting on my flank here, on the left that is, but kind of on my flank in these cornfields. Union is being pushed back in the center. Once again, this is the first time I kind of let go of the reins and let the AI commanders do what they want. They just kind of charge off. They do press the cornfield a bit, get themselves in range of canister fire of the Union artillery, and get themselves kind of torn to pieces. This is kind of where my army just sort of, I mean, I had been suffering pretty heavy casualties, but this midday attack was incredibly fierce, and I would say my army kind of starts losing combat effectiveness at this point. I mean, I'm beating the Union at this point in terms of the battlefield results. You know, French's division routed from the field, Hooker easily repulsed, Sedgwick's division coming on here, but, you know, not really threatening me a whole lot. Even if they turn me, I've still got reserves in the woods back there. But now I'm engaged in stand-up fights when the Union isn't attacking, taking casualties when I might otherwise just be resting and buying myself more time, and those men won't be there to resist future attacks. Now, my thought process is this is the main attack of the day in the center, and that if I can hold and rout the Union now, I might buy myself till nightfall, but it probably would have been more intelligent on my part to sit back in those defensive works along the sunken road rather than getting sucked into an open field battle in the middle of open fields against a much larger enemy force. I'm still doing fine, but the casualties are going to prevent me from, if McClellan deploys more forces than he did traditionally, these casualties are going to come back to haunt me later if they are any more aggressive than they were historically. My army kind of feels like it's melting away at this point. Suffered about 10,000 casualties. Not quite 10,000 yet. Which is right about where the historical amount was, and we're not even to noon yet. We're only around closing in on 10 o'clock. So about halfway through this scenario, this epic 11-hour scenario. Jeez, look at all those rifles just pouring into my flank. I mean, I could just be sitting back in the center or deploying these troops elsewhere. Instead, I'm charging straight into Union reserves in these cornfields, which hadn't even been deployed yet. And they've got artillery back there, too, which is pouring canister fire into me. I mean, it's just not an intelligent move on my part, especially on the left here. In the center, there was probably more hope of success there, and I do very well in the center. But on the left here, I'm pressing on, pushing the Union back, pressing on, not resting, not relaxing, taking casualties. Every minute, every body that falls leaves me at more disadvantage than the minute prior. Even a 1-to-1. I need a 2-to-1 kill-to-death ratio to even break even to survive, given that the Union has about 70,000 troops and I've only got about 40. A little bit less than 2-to-1. Tactically, everything's going well, but I'm not setting myself up for success, that's for sure. This is the 9 a.m. attack. Historically, let's see. Historically, at this time, the Confederates were launching counterattacks as well. They flanked Sedgwick in those woods. Although, interestingly enough, Sedgwick's division actually came out of the east woods. Historically, Sedgwick's division went through the west woods. So they actually marched around the wood in the east woods. They marched around kind of north of the cornfield, whereas right now they're attacking more directly into my right, which is not what happened historically. So that's, you know, an example of the variant here. Franklin's 6th Corps did come into the east woods, but they largely stayed uncommitted at this point. French's and Richardson's division will attack the center. So far, only French has attacked. I haven't seen Richardson yet. But he may be part of this attack. I believe he's got a brigade or two that's coming in on the right portion of the left part of the line. Just epic. This entire scenario. I know I've said it numerous times, but this is just huge and epic. And oh, there you go, an intercepted order. That's another one of those unique things about this game and the courier system. You can choose, I don't have it on this way, but if you want more difficult, more realistic simulations, you can choose to send all orders via courier, where there will be a spirit on the screen which travels from your character, which in this case I'm Lee, to whoever you're giving the order to. And then also the AI has to give orders via courier. So there's a realistic delay between when you issue the order and when it gets there. I mean, if you're right near them, it might be almost instantaneous. But if I'm going to send an order to the southern part of the battlefield, I mean, that could take 5, 10, 15 minutes potentially to get there. And couriers can be intercepted. So if they run between two regiments firing each other, or if they run through a Union regiment or an enemy regiment or something to that effect, I mean, just like in real life, they'll be killed or captured. Now the game automatically sends another courier if your courier falls, I believe. So that part's not as realistic, but it's still, you know, it's a delay in between when you issue the order and when it actually occurs, and that kind of makes sense why the why the United States Army actually apparently uses this game for training, for leadership training at the Army War College, which is just a testament to how great this game is, in my opinion, anyway. I probably, as I've already said, I probably micromanage this a bit, you know, manually making sure a regiment rearms, gets more ammo, and then sending regiments around to charge while their stuff is going on. I'm not paying as much attention to other parts of the battlefield as I probably should be. Get this regiment up here to protect that other regiment's flank over there. This Union's sending quite a few forces kind of toward the West Woods, but they're not part of Sedgwick's division, so... That's interesting that they came in on the opposite side of the battlefield. I don't know if it was scripted that way or if it just kind of randomly developed. It does say it's a historical variant, as I've said a few times, though, so maybe that was just one of those differences. Also not sure if cavalry fights in a more loose formation. I was commenting on how they seem to take fewer casualties, and I wonder if, I mean, that could be potentially because of the fact that they may fight in a more loose or different formation. They appear to have their own double line. When you put them into single line battle line, they have a double line rather than a single long line. Almost like they're kind of in the British formation that the British infantry used during Napoleonic times, where they'd have a four-man firing line. Now the British used it to increase volume of fire. But in this case, it seems like only the front line really fires. Whereas the infantry all seem to be firing, at least the spirits. I don't know how it's represented inside the computer. But the spirits all seem to be more or less firing at the same time. Looks like I've beaten off this attack pretty well, although I'm still foolishly pressing on with some regiments engaging near the Union troops in the cornfield. And there's a fence there along the edge of the cornfield, so those Union troops I'm attacking kind of in that center part of this left flank have cover, while my troops are just sitting out in the open. I mean, I've got reserves, it just... Probably would have happened if I didn't micromanage, but if I'm going to micromanage, I might as well make sure to do it right. I shouldn't just keep pressing on. This is something I did not realize was really occurring. I didn't really think about it. Kind of one of those in-the-moment decisions that I regretted. Thought maybe if I pressed him back I could have success, but there's still another whole line of uncommitted troops behind that. There goes some of my troops. Now I'm just advancing that one into its flank. I'm doing the smart thing here. I mean, there's some forces still engaged on the right, but I've got a whole brigade there just sitting and doing nothing. I'm going to send them forward. Great. Union advances much more here, though. They're going to expose their flank, potentially to my cavalry again. I think one thing that really helped me in this attack was that those cavalry units on the left prevented my line in the West Woods from being flanked, because you saw at the start of this little part of the battle, the Union was kind of getting around the left of the West Woods, and I had cavalry sitting there, which prevented that attack, and I still have some there, so probably a good decision to bring them closer in to kind of extend in my flank. Still got two regiments back there dismounted, just waiting. I can use them for something. This point is where I really got too aggressive. As I mentioned already, with the infantry attacking when they should have been resting. And then bringing these cavalry units in to get themselves engaged and shot to pieces. I ended up using some cavalry to, I don't believe it's part of this, I don't have it included in here, because I had to make some tough decisions, honestly. I mean, this is an 11-hour scenario. I obviously edited it down a bit, but there was a lot of stuff going on that I really had to edit quite a bit of video. I mean, only about 1/5 is about 2.5 hours that I've put all together here, which, if any of you, if you're still watching, I appreciate that a lot. There's you know, I mean, this is basically a full-length movie, 2.5 hours, and it could have been so much more. There wasn't a whole lot of standing around. There were a couple of brief lulls, maybe 15-20 minutes where there wasn't any fighting going on, and then just right back at it. And that only happened maybe once or twice where there was more than 10 or 15 minutes, or maybe more than 5 really minutes, any period where nothing was going on. Just kind of shows the intensity of this battle. On a percentage based, I mean, it was the bloodiest battle in American history, over 20,000 casualties. Now that's a little bit of a cheating, I guess you could say, because both sides in the battle were on the same, were countrymen, so whenever people say it was the bloodiest day in American history, well, that's when you combine casualties for Union and Confederate. But still, 22,000 men either killed, wounded, in 11 hours of fighting. That's over 2,000 men an hour. Over 30 men per minute. Every other second, someone was wounded or killed. This battery here is really kind of giving me a stabilizing force on my line. That massive battery. Entire line along the left here now engaged. My center attack, you can see there I had a few regiments to the right there a bit that were attacking, have all been routed and pushed back because of my foolish decision to push on. One of my cavalry regiments is engaged with the Union forces in the woods. Still have Hood's division. If I really wanted to make a serious push too, I mean, part of the problem in that attack, not really gaining any ground and just kind of dying there, was I pushed forward with units that were already exhausted and engaged, rather than using fresh units of over 3,000 men. I might have been able to break through that first line, maybe capture, disable some artillery, and then engage that second line heavily. I don't think there's any chance I would have broken through that second line, but I could have pushed deep into the cornfield, into the back of that cornfield, and really ravaged some more Union troops. As I check out the left here, still pretty safe. But if I had ravaged those Union troops, could have put them in a worse position to try and attack. If I was going to be aggressive, I should have been all out like I was in the center, where basically I just sent everything forward and kept them pushing forward as long as I could, instead of kind of half committing to an attack with half my troops. The lower bridge. What? Oh, great. It's only 10 a.m. Burnside's already attacking the lower bridge? I didn't think that happened till much later in the day. Is that more historical variance, or is that really what happened? Yeah. Okay, that is accurate. That's actually timed to the minute. Union troops did attack the lower bridge starting at 10 a.m., but they didn't cross very easily. That's something that didn't happen in this case. The Union got across. I'm not looking at the lower bridge right now, but I know from memory anyway that the Union got across the lower bridge pretty easily. I don't think this game really simulates kind of the difficulty of crossing a bridge as well. The volume of fire can't really just stop a unit from getting across a bridge without, you know... You can get routed when you're in column formation, which you have to be to cross the bridge, but the game doesn't simulate the volume of fire and artillery and things like that, physically making it almost impossible to cross. Put these men along a fence line so when the Union advances again, they've got some protection. French's division has rallied. Unfortunately. There's quite a few of them still. They have over 5,000 men. They outnumber me over to 2-1 there. They're just sitting there. I didn't do as good of a job destroying French as I had hoped, but at the very least I bought myself some time. Where's that Union unit going? That's kind of exposed their flank. So far, the Union hasn't gotten anywhere close to where they did historically. They historically pushed to the Dunker Church, which is back where I've mentioned Hood a few times, is kind of waiting. In the woods farther back, all the fighting's been going on in the fields. And as anticipated, with almost all open field fighting, casualties have been higher to this stage of the battle than they were historically. Something that does not favor me, being outnumbered 2-1 and only having about 38,000 men to draw from. Brought the cavalry over here, but this is kind of one of those times where I learned a tough lesson that cavalry in open field fighting just isn't all that effective. But for whatever reason, when they were engaged, I decided, hey, let's get them on their horses, see if we can charge into the Union flank. That was pretty gamey, I will say. They're taking fire from their front. Just ask them to jump on horses, which, if they were engaged in that kind of fight, would have been further to the rear. That's why they retreat. They get hit in the flank and then they retreat. Because I just didn't do that very well. Actually, cavalry is kind of an interesting point. They don't really use it. They're not used in traditional cavalry charges a whole lot in the Civil War. Union cavalrymen were not as highly trained as Confederate cavalrymen, especially as the war goes on. Confederate cavalrymen were much more like partisans. They do fight organized and in line of battle and are organized, but they're not trained to kind of the same sort of tactics that cavalry in Europe were. Same goes for infantry with regards to their relationship with cavalry, though, too. A lot of European advisors were unimpressed with Union cavalry or infantry, given they often were not even trained to form square, which was kind of a mandatory requirement in European armies. Although just a few years later, in the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, the futility of cavalry in a more modern battlefield was made apparent. There was one interesting example, however, where cavalry was used successfully. I'll elaborate on that more a little bit after this melee. Send multiple regiments in. Hopefully we outnumber and overwhelm the Union. I really don't want to get my men surrendered.